Hi. Countdown clock, no pressure. You can't see it, but I can see it. So welcome, We the Patients. I really like that. They're like, you should call it that. I said, okay, awesome. We're going to talk about what I think that means. Maybe we can discuss what that could mean to you. But I want to start with a great quote, because if you want to be a thought leader, you first have to have some thoughts. I will have some thoughts tonight. Maybe one or two might be valuable. We'll find out, but a little backstory on me. So DeLorean, 1995. College senior, 10 years classically trained on the piano, en route to grad school to be a film composer and study with Hans Zimmer at USC. I was 21 and I knew exactly what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. How often does that happen? That hair, I don't miss it. Jufro. Quality. I'm not that flexible anymore either. But anyway, so man plans and God laughs, and I was diagnosed with brain cancer. My symptoms are interesting because we talk about early detection, but I couldn't arpeggiate for no reason. The fine motor coordination in my left hand just was going away. I was misdiagnosed with Epstein-Barr, meningitis, carpal tunnel. At one point, they thought I had the flu, and they literally gave me Robitussin for brain cancer. I mean, SUNY, great school, college services, Binghamton. All right. But anyway, so they gave me 6 months, and they said, we'll see what happens. So 6 months passed, and boom, I'm still here. I did manage to graduate on time, but I was not able to pursue grad school because I couldn't play. So all that was gone. And back at the time, that was the worst day of my life. Not being told you're going to die from cancer, but that I would never be John Williams. So I went back to the doctors and I said, all right, well, I'm still here. When am I going to die? And, all right, so the chemo story is the main focus of where I believe this narrative carries forward even 24 years later. So they wanted to give me chemotherapy on top of the craniotomy and on top of the 6,000 CG of easy bake oven Fukushima Chernobyl radiation that I got to my whole body for 33 days. I was a shell of a human. I lost 110 pounds in 3 months. That was, I'm not going to do the math on me now, but I was pretty thin. But they're called love handles for a reason. They said, we want to give you chemotherapy. And I said, when am I going to die? And they said, 50% chance for 5 years. And I said, well, that sucks because I'm 22. What else you got for me? And they said, well, we'd like to give you this magical thing we're pulling out of our ass. If I knew then what I know now, chemotherapy. Well, what does that increase my 5-year rate to? They said, 55% chance for 5 years. They were proud of that number back then because they wanted to extend my life at any cost. So my uncle happens to be a geneticist. My father's best friend, my godfather, Jay Tishfield. You can Google him. He worked with Larry Einhorn in Indiana Bloomington. He helped invent cisplatin. This is like my uncle. And he went to Sloan Kettering on my behalf and said, you're going to tell me what you're going to give Matt. And back then, pulling that data was impossible, but he did it. And it turns out that this crazy cocktail they were making up out of no guidelines and no standards contained a significant amount of vincristine. Now, vincristine, many of you may know in the industry, causes permanent peripheral neuropathy at certain doses, and this dose would have done that. My oncologist didn't tell me that as a side effect, so Jay comes back to me and says, Matt, you don't want this chemotherapy. Now imagine you're talking to your godson, who's 22, and he says this to me. You'd rather die in 5 years with the chance of playing piano again than die in 5 years and 3 months or 50 years from now and not have that. Because I know what's important to you and they don't. So I'm back to the doctors and I said, no chemo. And they said, what's wrong with you? We're trying to save your life. And I said, GFU, and I walked out. And it's 24 years ago. I was nice about it, but I said GFU. Anyway, I didn't really have a 20s. They were shot. Isolation, sadness, crippling depression, anxiety. And I finally met a peer 7 years later, a guy named Craig Lustig. He worked with Susan Weiner at the Children's Cause. He was a lobbyist, but he also had brain cancer in his 20s, and I finally had a buddy. And he said to me, I was working in advertising because I didn't get to go to grad school. He said, why don't you go into advocacy? I said, what the hell is advocacy? And he said, you can make sure that no one gets robot-tested for brain cancer. I said, deal. So I founded Stupid Cancer because I wanted a tribe that I could belong to without a judgment and a stigma. And going in advertising, Steve Jobs is my hero, and he likes to say, don't give people what they want, you give them what they didn't know they needed. And I didn't know that I needed a community of my peers without judgment or stigma. And some of you know this already, but after 13 years of helping to get adolescent and young adult cancer into mainstream oncology, I did step down as CEO in January for these reasons. They keep getting bigger. I don't know how that happens. But what really grinds my gears is like these words have now come out of the ether of my history, and the one that bothers me the most is choice. We talk about access and awareness and things like that. But I look at this progression from the patient to the consumer as a patient, or what I'm making up as the oncology consumer. Because we talk about turning to our tribes now for making decisions. What is Yelp for clinical trials? There isn't a Yelp for clinical trials. But let's talk about buying a fridge, right? You want to buy a fridge, you can research the fridge, you go to Consumer Reports, you check the reviews, and you buy the fridge that's right for you. Because there's supply and demand. There's no demand in cancer. No one ever said this, I can't wait to get on that trial because it's on Groupon. Doesn't happen that way. So we talk about education, patient education, awareness. It should be education about choice. Because if you don't know what your choices are, I didn't know chemotherapy would have made my hands sterile unless I had Uncle Jay. And it's nice to say, oh, just be your own advocate. Just be. Can you be your own advocate? Are you your own advocate? Come on, just be your own advocate. No, you can't. You can't just be your own advocate. I had 6 months to live. I couldn't think about being my own advocate. So who's going to be your handrail? Who's your sommelier? Who is your mixologist? Who is your Sherpa guide? When you enter a marketplace that you don't research, that you don't want to be a part of, and that you resent being in the first place, that you have to spend money on that you don't have. What kind of choice is that? Not everyone can have Uncle Jay. That is actually Uncle Jay. I took this picture because I saw him on Monday for my birthday. And I said, you're going to be in my slides. He's like, fine. Now, we talk about innovation is the solution to everything, but I like to think that innovation is only as good as what it actually innovates. And I wrote a piece a while ago called Stop Innovating and Do Something. And it was a good piece, but it talked about from the consumer patient perspective out there, what good is the latest and greatest if I don't know that this chemotherapy is going to make my hands numb? So I look at we the patients as a new conversation, a new movement from the bottom up, not from industry down. We're mad as hell, and we want to do something about it. But the change is not going to come from innovation. It's going to come from consumer advocacy and consumer protection. Who is going to make sure that we know what we need to know, because we can't possibly know that in advance. You're not buying a fridge. So what mechanisms of protection could there possibly be for us? And what is the point of an informed decision when you don't know what you don't know? So my final thought is this. Who gains the most by protecting American citizens when they enter the consumer oncology marketplace? Because until the Amazon drone shows up in my window and infuses me while Alexa sings my kids to sleep from an Apple Music playlist, and the ghost of Steve Jobs is making my blue apron over here, I'm really curious of where we're going to be in a couple of years. But that's no excuse to start rattling cages today. So we, the patients, thank you very much.